So you being a marketeer, so you understand that nostalgia is a very potent weapon for you, and that is something that I am sure would have helped you in coming up with the quizzing memes Facebook page that you did about 3 years back,
Yeah, it was
2017. Yeah.
17.
So what led you to it? So I have a story with this. So I was then a part of the Delhi Quiz Club WhatsApp group, and because nobody knew who the real admin behind the page was, so everybody was pinning it down to me due to the kind of person I am. But I was like, "Ki main nahi hu," or whatever. But of course, nobody believed, and nobody had Panda in mind because that is not something that, as in, of course, you had the uh, as in understanding of the culture more than anybody else, but you didn't look like the person who would do that kind of buffoonery. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the second episode of Whose Question Is This? Uh, Today's guest is a very good friend of ours, uh, somebody who is very well known, who's been quizzing for a far longer time than either of us. So put your hands together for Snehashis Panda.
Yay!
Straight up want to clarify, I think most people will realize through the course of this conversation that I haven't been quizzing as long as most people think I do, but we'll get to that while we're in the midst of the conversation.
All right.
All right, we'll just dive in straight away because we've already delayed this enough. Yeah, so Snehashish, can we start with where you started? What was your earliest quizzing memories back in school or whenever you started?
So, funnily enough, all of the schools that I had across my childhood, and I've been through a fair number of them because of my background as a Navy kid, they all had quizzing cultures ingrained in them. But I actually started off pretty late in Kolkata in 2009.
All right.
So I've been in Kolkata since 2006, and most people would know that Kolkata has a thriving quizzing culture. They have a lot of open quizzes happening every other weekend, and around the mid 2000s and late 2000s, the frequency and intensity of those quizzes are increased. There was also thriving college quiz culture back then, propagated by colleges like JU and Presidency. But I hadn't caught the quizzing bug as much till 2009, despite a lot of my close friends having been quizzers then. So what really triggered it was the presence of this one man called Mr. Errol O'Brien, who most people would know by his association of being a brother to Mr. Neil O'Brien, the propagator of Indian quizzing in some ways, of course, the 1967 quiz. So Mr. Errol O'Brien used to be tasked, like he used to travel around a lot of Kolkata schools, and my school, Lakshmipat Singhana Academy, was one of the schools where he came in to take quiz classes as an extracurricular activity. So my school actually had a thriving culture where a bunch of my seniors were really good quizzers. I had batchmates who were really good quizzers. And while we were prominent in the circuit, we couldn't manage to break through as much. And in those 2 years of mine in Kolkata, where I started quizzing in 2009 and 2010, I attended a fair number of school quizzes across schools like St. Thomas, BHS, stuff like Star Mark, Horlicks, WizKids, while also getting to attend open and college quizzes in Kolkata. So I've been to Curiosity, the JU Quiz Fest, where Mr. Joy Bhattacharya hosts an open sports quiz. Managed to qualify for a couple of college quizzes while in school. Had a couple of breakthroughs. But funnily enough, my first ever quiz that I attended was a Derek O'Brien quiz. And one of the last vestiges of his quiz master, of him being a quiz master as such. So this was the Limca Book of World Records quiz, which a lot of school quizzers from that time could probably remember or associate with. That was my first quiz where I just ended up going just because my friend asked me to. We finished third in a finale which had a bunch of 12th graders. We got trolled by Derek O'Brien for looking like a bunch of 5th graders. So a lot of fun around that quiz got associated well around that quiz, and I enjoyed that experience. That experience again triggered me to get into the circuit a little more deep and see what's there right in it. So that's where it all started in sense.
So yeah, so right, as you said, so you've been quizzing far longer than us. I started only in 2013, while Prithvi started when 20.
Yeah, 2013.
Okay. So we were right, as I said.
Yeah.
So you have, yeah. You have quizzed in both school and college, right?
Right.
So what kind of difference, as in, so you can have kind of two aspects to this answer, right? Your personal quizzing, right,
Right.
in school and college, and of course the general trend of school and college quizzing, plus of course the overall Indian quizzing trend also.
So the thing is, most of quizzing culture in schools is propagated from that sense of GK or general knowledge. I remember attending a Milo GK test, which is invariably a quiz long ago in school, but I didn't consider myself a quizzer then to call myself a quizzer then. But yeah, I've seen that case that a lot of people talk about how people selected for quizzing contingencies in school were based off academics, which is completely the wrong criteria to decide how quizzes are supposed to be ascertained. I've also seen that case of how quizzing in school is limited in the sense of the topics that are typically there. There's your typical TCSI quiz, there's an India quiz propagated by the CBSE or INTAC, or there's a few general quizzes propagated by schools which have quizzing cultures in place. But a lot of the innovation that happens in school quizzing or the heritage is limited to very small pockets in cities like Delhi or Calcutta or Bangalore, where that quizzing culture ensures that the people quizzing in school do move on to colleges. But for most people across India, tier one, tier two cities, that really doesn't happen. There's not much of exposure that school quizzing gives to you. You're limited by a set of topics. You're limited by your age and the exposure to your own exposure to topics in general. But that transition to college quizzing itself opens up a lot more avenues. The first time I attended a scent quiz, a science plus entertainment quiz, I was practically mind blown. I did not even believe that such a combination could exist while I was quizzing in school. But something like that in a college quiz, of course, opened my mind to it. The fact that I was no longer limited to people in my own school or my own organization, uh, and them being my only quiz partners was no longer a limitation. I could team across colleges with people in cross college quizzes. So that freedom that college quizzing allows you in itself was very liberating in general. And lastly, because of where I was and how it ensured, and I'm sure we'll get into this with more detail, college quizzing allows you to travel to different areas because of how the Indian college quizzing circuit is based, like a quiz fest being hosted across a weekend, or there being certain allowances for you to go to different cities and expose yourself to the quizzing circuits or styles in those cities. So there's a marked difference, and clearly there's a certain sense of maturity that steps in, at least for some people, when they move from school to college quizzing.
So, like you mentioned, like you've been traveling a lot for quizzes. So I have never traveled for a quiz. So this is a completely like an experience that I've only heard in stories. So I'm sure you have a lot of interesting stories from these travel and all these quizzes. So can you share some?
Uh, Not sure of how interesting these stories would be, but I'd really like to give people a premise of how it is. So my first outstation travel for a quiz was from Mumbai to Ahmedabad for my canvas at Mica, where I invariably ended up studying much later. This was a couple of quizzes hosted by Suraj Menon, and that marked difference which I spoke about in the previous question about the upleveling that goes from school quizzes to college quizzes. The first time I was exposed to it, I didn't really. Um, I'm not sure how much I dealt or adjusted to it, but we did well in those quizzes. So I kind of just got thrown into the deep end and realized that, oh, right, this is how college quizzing works. So my first couple of travels were pretty much in and out and nearby Bombay to Pune to Ahmedabad before I realized that there were a lot of wider and bigger quizzing circuits, college quizzing circuits across India. So a lot of these trips were to places like Hyderabad, where Introbank at Nalsar, Hyderabad was a particular favorite. I traveled to Sarang at IIT Madras a couple of times as well. A couple of open quizzing visits to Delhi as well for Connaught Place in general, and again a wide gamut of experiences across these places. But it's not one particular story that's interesting, but the fact that there is this inherent sense of banter amongst quizzers that's propagated mostly along these college quiz fests. So these are very intense, particularly three quizzes packed in a day across a weekend. So you're doing Saturday, Sundays, 6 quizzes across a weekend. So there's very little space for relaxing across those quizzes. But the banter that lies between teammates and competition on the stage or while traveling. So a lot of my friends or quiz teammates and later came about from me traveling with them along with these along with them for these quiz fests. A lot of these trips revolved around food in those cities wherever we managed to help them right after quizzes or before them. A lot of them revolved around banter while traveling in quizzes, and particularly meeting people across these colleges. So I'm kind of the person who actually a lot of people talk to for just understanding what a particular premise is more than just quizzing in those areas and colleges as well.
Right.
Right. So you talked about the kind of banter. It's like something that I have also felt. I think Prithvi would be of the same thought process, that there's a kind of different kind of friendship that forms with quizzing, right? So
Right.
that is something that you would have felt firsthand before your travel stories also with BQC, and the thing and other sorts. So you became one of the kind of admins, if you may, right? You helped send the mails across, make some posters. So could
Right.
you talk a bit about your BQC adventure, if you may?
Right. So the Bombay Quiz Club, for people who don't know, has been active since 2007, since the city of Bombay, in the city of Bombay. They're a non-profit organization who concentrate on building the quizzing culture in Bombay and host the Mumbai Quiz Festival, which is one of the bigger open quiz fests that's held in the country. So in 2014, when I moved to Bombay to study engineering, I came to know, and I did know of their existence in the city and about how they meet for open quiz sessions every other Sunday. And this back then used to happen in this very quaint little office called Pinstorm in Santa Cruz West. So these weekly trips to Pinstorm were a lot of fun and a lot of a big enriching learning experience for me, because Bombay in itself is like a potpourri in terms of the cuisine culture there, or more likely based off the fact that people coming there are not typically Mumbaikars themselves. So these are people who've been exposed to a wide variety of cultures, lives, and in that sense, quizzing as well across different cities. And finally, they've come down to Bombay to settle there, typically in their late 20s, early 30s, late 40s. So
Right.
the BQC mix in general is a very vibrant mix. It has CEOs hobnobbing with college students like me back then. So I had a wide exposure to a great number of people there. What happened was that I, in general, have been what you would call a enthu cutlet when it comes to organizing quizzes or promoting the culture. This is something that I also try to push on to the institutions that I moved on to across my life, both across college and school. So, what the BKC enabled me and me in turn helped them out was the fact that I was very enthusiastic about how things went around. I wanted to help out, and they were also eager to have someone like me on board. So they entrusted me the responsibility of scheduling posts across their social media, helping with the collation of quizzes and sending them out, just managing general activities. And I had a lot of wise heads that I was working with. So it wasn't really that tough, and it gave me that sense of responsibility that no other role could have in this sense. In a way, it also helped me reach out to a large number of people that I typically wouldn't have, because most queries were routed through me. So the Bombay Quiz Club group, if you haven't checked it out, has about 10,000 members on Facebook, and it's fairly active in terms of quiz announcements there. So a lot of rerouting happens through that, which I had exposure to. And in some ways, I'm glad that I could bring in a lot more people to the quizzing fold. Not as much as I would have liked to, or maybe in the manner that I went about. But I'll put that down to my age and my youth as then as well. I don't think I was as bright then as maybe I am now. I have a lot more constructive ideas to offer as much as I did then, and I wish I could have done a much better job. I did fine, I think, but the people who've continued on are looking to improve the scene in terms of more women coming into the fold, in terms of it being a safer space for quizzing in general, and in general just expanding the plethora of quizzes that happen in the city. Because right now, despite a lot of efforts that have gone into it in the last few years, quizzing is still limited in its sense in Bombay because of how the culture is. We don't have a school quizzing scene in Bombay at all. The college quizzing scene in Bombay is absolutely dying. Like by the time I'd graduated, a lot of premier prominent college quizzes in Bombay had shut out because people really weren't interested except for the few regulars that turned up. So these are avenues that if I'm ever back in Bombay again and continuing my work with the BQC right now, I'm limited to the creative output that goes onto their Instagram and Facebook handles for quizzing posters. Once I'm back in Bombay, I hope to improve and help out with this aspect as well. Just going back to the travels that we spoke about in a couple of questions ago, um, in a way, me calling someone Da is something that I picked up from traveling down south for quizzes a lot. So around 2016-17, most of my friends, quizzing or otherwise, realized that I would say "What's up, Da" instead of "What's up," which is clearly me ingraining or realizing that there's a lot more stuff out there and cultures that or fun stuff that I could pick up and incorporate in myself as well. So these little things, of course, added to the travel and added to the fun of it as well.
Yeah, so coming back to my points, as I was saying, you being a marketer today, as in you have done your MBA for the past 2 years
Right.
and going into corporate now. So you being a marketeer, so you understand that nostalgia is a very potent weapon for
Right.
you, and that is something that I am sure would have helped you in coming up with the quizzing memes Facebook page that you did about 3 years back.
Yeah, close to 3 years ago,
2017. Yeah.
17.
So what led you to it? So I have a story with this. So I was then a part of the Delhi Quiz Club WhatsApp group, and because nobody knew who the real admin behind the page was, so everybody was pinning it down to me due to the kind of person I am. But I was like, "Ki main nahi hu," or whatever. But of course, nobody believed, and nobody had Panda in mind because that is not something that, as in, of course, you had the uh, as in understanding of the culture more than anybody else, but you didn't look like the person who would do that kind of buffoonery. It was all pinned down to me because but yeah, so that brings me back to the question: what led you to kind of come up with that or whatever?
So I'll give you a little backdrop to this. So there's been a running joke between me and a few others, particularly from the BQC and a couple of friends as well, about me wanting to write a book, and a book in terms about the development of the quizzing culture in India in the modern era. I don't think any literature
And you
chronicles.
wrote a and you wrote something for your college with that, right? As in
Yeah, I
a
did end up writing
small
an
article.
assignment
Yeah,
based on it, but
yeah, yeah. Assignment.
nothing on what the original plan about the book was. But like I said, there is no existing literature chronicling all of this. Some people would know about Curiously Curious, the documentary that Mr. Sarath Rao created, chronicling a little bit of quizzing across India. That was in a visual medium. I wanted to cover it in the written medium, but I don't think I'd absorbed enough culture across the country yet. There are a few pockets missing, and hopefully me moving to Bangalore soon enough should complete a few of those holes. But yeah, that running joke about me writing a book had been there in the standing for a long while. Now what happened was right around 2016-17, in some sense the meme culture in India boomed a bit, like it propagated, pun intended, and memes got like became a mainstream form of communication back then. And I've been dabbling in memes informally for a long while now, since about 2013, 2014, since I started college. Like I do them in college quiz groups, college class groups, or just random quiz groups that I was a part of. But what triggered it was the fact that once someone in passing said that, just like how you said that I had an understanding of quizzing cultures across India, unlike no one else because of my travels, and I'm grateful to have that. So that just struck up in my head as an idea to have a little bit of fun. I was a fair bit bored. I had nothing to do. My exams were a couple of months off. I was supposed to move to Micah in June, and this was about April or something around there. So I had a couple of months to kill. Nothing much. Just pulled up the Facebook page manager page, started quizzing memes, downloaded the meme generator app, and just rolled on to it. What helped me that I had access to a lot of um, info, come fun day, come gossip across a wide variety of circuits. So I had a lot of people befuddled for a very, very long time until I decided to disclose my identity on my own, which is a fun story of its own. So I was a part of the Delhi quizzing group, like you said, and like you said, most people thought it was you while I was having fun in the background. Actually, someone joined me in the middle of the thing as well, towards the end of it, and most people don't know that there's another admin to quizzing memes as well. In fact, our most popular post, the one about the video where Key and Peele move around, is by the other admin and not me. So I've been getting a fair share of credit where I'm not supposed to do so. But yeah, I mean, me having known quizzers across the country, cultures across the country, triggered it. You're right.
All right. So,
Again, any name droppings
yeah,
on who the
any
other admin
plans you'll
is?
disclose who's the other admin?
I think this I can do. So the other admin is Lokesh Kaza of
Oh,
Nalsar previously, and he
Would
does
not have
drop.
expected him.
yeah. Again,
Yeah, he joined in a little while a couple of years ago, and he puts in some fun stuff as well. The page isn't as active as I intended it to be in recent times. Hopefully, this
The
conversation,
ideas flow out also.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. Hopefully,
conversation
hopefully it
should
does.
trigger a little bit of activity, and you should hope to see some memes on your feed soon enough.
yeah, we'll attach the link of the page for those who are not
For sure,
familiar
for
with
sure.
this. All right. So now that we've established that you're a prolific quizzer, you've traveled all across the country, the natural progression in any quiz's life is to hosting quizzes. So what was the first quiz that you hosted and what's the story behind that?
Um, Not sure about how prolific a quizzer I am, but being a quiz master is where I feel I still lack in certain areas of trying to tone the difficulty of questions. I'll get into that. But my first quiz, I think, was this quiz that I had hosted at SIES Bombay. It's a college in Bombay, bachelor's degree college in Bombay, and they'd invited me to host their Mela quiz. Uh, Post that, I'd hosted this big ass quiz called the Action Replay Quiz, which is an open spent quiz that the HR college hosts every year. And right after that, because of my frequent associations and trips to IIT Bombay for their weekly quizzes, which they used to host at night, which is very fun and entertaining. They also invited me to do an open sports quiz. So these were the first 2-3 quizzes which came about in a flurry. Um, uh, about that progression from quizzer to quizmaster, like I said, there are certain areas where I feel I lack, in the sense that I cannot ascertain what the right difficulty of the audience is a lot of times. And in that sense, while I try to assume that this crowd would be capable of this much, my hit rate is really bad. So that's something that I'm looking to improve at. But unlike most quiz masters who tend to focus on decreasing the text of the question as much as possible to make it lucid, I have a completely contrasting style, which I still believe works for me in some measure. I like to have text on the screen. I'm not saying I'll plaster the screen with a lot of text, unnecessary text, but I like to have people to have a certain amount of segue to where I'm leading them on to. So you'll see my questions typically tend to have a small 2-line paragraph at the start of the question to bring them to that premise at first, which again is something like a hit and a miss amongst some quizzes, but I've managed to stick to that premise as much as possible. So when I started off hosting quizzes informally at first, it was mostly through the BQC, where you're supposed to at least host one quiz or a couple of quizzes across the year. And back then, I felt that the benchmark for my audience was very, very high, because these were pedigree open quizzers who used to attend the sessions. So I was always conflicted between whether the funda should be worthy enough or my framing should be workable enough. And therein, my that dichotomy of trying to decide which is correct, I faltered a fair bit. But I was lucky enough to have someone like Sachin Deshpande. He's a close friend of mine and a part of the BQC formerly. Uh, he helped me a lot with understanding the psyche of the audience, and like my aforementioned travels, the places that I went to and moved from college quizzing to open quizzing and attending the odd chance open quizzing outside as well, that allowed me to fine tune into exactly what I want. And now I have a definitive style that I'm sure of that works for me most times. So it's typical for people to be enamored by certain quizmasters and adopt their styles completely. I'm sure this phase happened to everyone once they've attended a major Chandrakant Nair quiz. So they try to make a
Yeah.
question with that absolute wordplay, or they try to make it like a quizzition styles quiz where there's a trap in the question and you need to identify it. So there's a lot of copied inspiration, which is not a bad thing to start off, but it's very important to develop that style of your own which I sort of developed in the last 3 years, I'd say. So this again comes with practice. Someone like Aditya Gadre said once that most of your learning through quizzes will come through setting more quizzes. There is a certain glass ceiling, a ceiling that you will hit with respect to quizzing in general. But to broaden and move beyond topics that you're exposed to, you need to set more quizzes and set more quizzes actively, not just for your own, but get them guinea pigged, host them for an audience, host an informal session so that you have absolute feedback. So someone like Abhinav has been someone who's given me a lot of feedback throughout the years, which has helped me fine-tune quizzes across the years.
Right.
So, as we were talking about the approach of the quiz, right, of the question making.
Right.
So you said about the amount of texts and things like that. So
Yeah.
you have a wide varieties of quiz masters, right?
Right.
So who is your favorite one, basically? As in, you can have multiple, I'm sure, but
Right.
who is your absolute favorite in terms of getting to a quiz, having a lot of time, good time, trying to learn something new that you wouldn't have learned anywhere else. So
Right.
all of that taken into picture, who would be your absolute favorite quiz master?
So I don't have an absolute favorite, but a few of them, and they have very definitive niches, which is why I prefer them. So again, someone like Major Chandrakant Nair is an absolute amaze because of how his questions are framed, the scope and the wide variety of exposure and topics, and that absolute latch that you need to unlock to get to that premise that clicks open the funda in your head is something that I really like working out. A combination of Aditya Gadre and Aniket Khasgewale together, who used to host Mood Indigo quizzes together a couple of years ago. So their quizzing style in general tends to be a combination of workable funda as well as introduction to new premises that you typically wouldn't have in a college quiz. Their framing again is that lucid style where as much text is only required is on the screen. Someone like a Saint Rajiv Rai of Quizzition, again, quizzes that have opened me up to a lot more premises. The framing again is perfect, is supposed to lead you in and lead you out just like it should be. Even like Mr. Naveen Rajaram's questions are very workable, very accessible in general.